From the land of the midnight sun, where grit meets pure glamour, we are the Midnight Sun Sisters. My name is Kaylee Perot, and I'm here with Tricia Brown, the author of The Queen of Fairbanks, a book that she wrote about the most furthest northern bag lady. And I just fell in love with this book when I read it. I saw it on the Fireside Books Facebook page, and I was like, I've got to get this book.
That's great.
And just the photo on the front of the book, we've got it here. Well, we've got it right there, actually. And it just drew me. And so I needed to get that book. So I am so happy to be here with you today. This has become one of my favorite books, and I'm so happy to be spending some time with you.
Thanks.
So I really love the way that you started the book. I mean, you have to start from the beginning, like how you got to Alaska, because otherwise you wouldn't have come to know Irene.
Isn't that an essential question that so many people ask Alaskans who weren't born here? Like, why are you here? How'd you get here?
Exactly.
So used to that one.
Yes. And you started it off so Alaskan-like. You said, I've got the quote here, "Oh, we just followed each other up the highway, kind of like caribou." And that's a perfect way of saying it. And so it sounds like your uncle and then your father came, and then your father said, "Oh, there's a secretary position for you, and I've got your new supervisor's name," and then you came. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a lot of disentangling ourselves from where we were. I was married. I had 2 preschool girls. We each had jobs, and it was like, are we going to do this or not? It's a big step for anybody relocating to Alaska. But back then, it was, I think, more of an unknown, pre-Google, pre-everything internet. Just letters from my dad and stuff that he'd put in there to inform us, here's what life is like and that sort of thing. And it was pretty intriguing, but it was pretty scary too.
Yeah, there was a portion where he mentioned that there was a wolf in the neighborhood, and you're like, I'm not so sure about Alaska.
There's he became an Alaskan pretty quickly because there was a lot of hyperbole associated, which Alaskans love. Oh yeah, in our neighborhood. Oh yeah, there was a wolf killed a neighbor's dog. He didn't say no big deal, but it was insinuated.
Yeah,
it terrified me. I was like, yeah, I don't know.
Coming from Illinois, I'm sure. So were you in a big city in Illinois or a small town?
Yeah, we were in Lake County, Illinois, which is at the northernmost edge of Illinois. The Lake Michigan's on one edge of it, and Wisconsin's on the other. And it's called Lake County because it's a chain of lakes there. And so our lives were apart. We went water skiing and snow machining there, snowmobiling, as we used to call it. We did a lot of fun outdoor things. And, so we're like, yeah, let's see what it's like.
So do you recall the drive on the Alcan?
Vividly.
Yeah, there's portions of it that's like, how did my car survive? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you were with 2 young children.
Well, it was not paved. I mean, it was the thing that really strikes me even now was the sound of the roaring gravel all the time, gravel and dirt, just that background noise in conversation and listening to music. We had a cassette player in our Blazer, and I still associate the best of bread with that drive, but the sound. And then when we get close to a town, it would go to pavement. It would just like somebody just turned it off completely. And it was like, oh my gosh, listen to that. Nothing. That was pretty wonderful, when you're on pavement finally after so many. Sure. And then we had rain, and so the pavement was mud. It was very muddy. And so the pictures that I have of of our little trailer that we were pulling, the whole front of it was just caked with mud, just like 4 inches of mud being thrown up from the tires of the Blazer. So
Oh my goodness.
mud and gravel and oncoming trucks, because it was really a trucker road more than anything, it felt like. And it was a little scary. You know, we had the milepost. Everybody knows about the milepost if you're going to drive the Alaska Highway.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a copy. I think I still have that copy, and kind of mapped out how many miles we have till here. It's a math quiz on your lap the whole time. How many miles from here have we been? How many miles to here have we got to go? Oh, what about kilometers? And imperial gallons and all of that. And we were so delayed by all of our traumatizing problems with the truck and the trailer, not the truck so much as the trailer. It took us 2 weeks to do something that should have been a week.
Oh, wow.
And then we weren't calling anybody because we didn't know how to call long distance from an international line,
Sure.
and we didn't know how to deal with coins. I don't know. We were super young.
Yeah.
That was in our favor in a lot of ways.
That's awesome that you took that step and took that adventure into the unknown.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of Alaska is. It's Wild West, and you're going to Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Central, right in the middle of Alaska, pretty much.
The Golden Heart?
Yeah, the Golden
Yeah.
Heart of Alaska. I love that. So what was your impression when you first got to Fairbanks?
Well, for one, we had our last flat right at the border of Yukon and Alaska, and it was something like 9:45 p.m. And of course, it was bright because we were in July. And we said, we don't have any spares. That was it. That was the last one. We had been buying little tires all along the way.
Oh, wow.
And we were using the rims to kind of hold the trailer up if we had to run. And that's what we did. Propped up the trailer with rims, and he took the trailer off, and we waited by the trailer, and he just hightailed it back to the last gas station we saw if he could get there before they closed. So there was all this tension. And for the first time ever, and I think this is a God thing, it was just flat, not exploded, gone kind of tire.
Okay.
The other ones all just went away because it had too much weight in these little. It was a little snowmobile trailer that we put a box on. It was too heavy just with the box, But anyway, he came galloping back. And so the last 300 miles then from the border to Fairbanks, we had no more spares because we had that one fixed. But it was midnight sun, and we traded off. It was my turn to drive. And so to me, that last stretch between the Yukon border and Fairbanks itself, it was just glorious and quiet. The children were sleeping. Everyone was sleeping. We had picked up a girl on the way who was pregnant and kind of had some distress going on with her life and needed a ride. So we had her in the truck too.
Oh, wow.
So, so we got to Fairbanks really early before anybody was up in the household, my dad and stepmom's household. They were still sleeping when we pulled into town, so we didn't want to go directly to their house. So we went to downtown and parked in what used to be the visitor center cabin, the little cabin that became the Yukon Quest cabin along the Chena River there. It had a big parking lot, which is now part of Golden Heart Plaza. And in that parking lot, we were able to park this long rig and went across the street to the Star of the North restaurant to have sourdough pancakes. So that was my introduction.
Perfect.
And it was delicious. Everybody was happy. Can't go wrong, pancakes with little girls,
Or sourdough pancakes at that, for sure. That's awesome. Okay, and then so the day that you got to Fairbanks,
it was a Friday.
It was a Friday. And then the next day was
Saturday.
The Golden Sun Parade?
Golden Days.
Oh, Golden Days.
They used to have a whole week of events all week long, and then the finale was Golden Days, the Grand Parade on Saturday. And then, as now I think still, they choose someone to be Felix Pedro to lead the way to, start the parade. And he's the one who discovered gold nearby and what's really started the gold rush there, the boomtown.
Wow.
So the Felix Pedro lookalike, and he sounds like he's Hispanic, but no, he was actually, his name was Felice Padroni. He was an Italian. And so
Wow.
he had the big old mustache and, he's well loved back in Italy still in his hometown. So
Very
yeah.
interesting.
And his wife is buried in Fairbanks, but he is not. So
Oh, okay.
yeah. Anyway, it's a great parade. It was very exciting to sit there and watch, very community oriented. It had wonderful floats, all these homemade cool floats where they, did cool things to the float. They didn't just put some kids on a sled and yay,
Sure.
marching bands and politicians. It was an election year, so there were politicians, lots of walking and waving and handing out flyers. And the North Pole fire truck I mentioned had Santa Claus on top. So there,
Oh, Christmas in July. There you go.
I had my my camera was a 110. If anybody out there remembers 110s, but it's the kind where you would squeeze it together to advance the film. Just go ka-tunk. Anyway, I finished the roll that was in my camera from our trip on that Golden Days parade.
Oh.
And that's when I saw Irene the first time.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Did you take any pictures of Irene?
I didn't.
That
No.
first parade?
No,
Okay.
I was just kind of, wow, my mouth was hanging open looking at her and watching the crowd and trying to take in what was happening, kind of, because she was obviously well respected and loved. And, I heard the kind of a roar from down the street as she is advancing to where we were sitting. And got closer and closer, and people are like, woohoo, trying to get her to look at them. And, she wasn't, not everybody loved her that much. I mean, some people were like, cross the street rather than deal with her outgoing personality. It was a strong one. But on this day, she was the queen. And she was waving like Queen Elizabeth style, with one hand while she had her handlebar. She was in a 3-wheeled adult-sized trike. And as she rolled towards us, she had her head away from us on their side. And she turned her head. And then that's when I saw these really severe burn scars on her face. And her fingers were kind of curled in from damage from a fire at some time in her life. I knew nothing, of course, but my stepmother was standing behind me. I was on the curb with the rest of the family, the little guys and stuff, and she bent over and said, "That's not a costume." She said, "That's Irene. She's our bag lady." So.
Man, I have, that is amazing. So on the sign behind her tricycle on the basket, it said Irene Mary Sherman, Queen of Fairbanks, born 1911.
Fairbanks born. She was always like, "This is my place. I was born here."
Well, her family was pioneers there.
They were. Yeah.
That's just amazing. And one thing that I really enjoyed about the book was how deep you went into her ancestry. That must have taken a lot of research.
Yeah, I can tell you this started, it was going on during COVID. So, I was able to pack up and go down to the little desk at the Lusac Library, and they used to have the Alaska section, which is now the round part of the Lusac Library. Right now it's a space for events, but it used to be Alaskana, total Alaskana stuff. I mean, federal reports and memoirs and all kinds of, wonderful reading if you're a history nerd like I am. And it was so much so they had Bruce Merrill was the librarian there. He was the art, he knew everything. He was a walking, I don't know if Bruce is with us still, but I just adored him for the depth of his knowledge. and microfilm. They had little side rooms with microfilm in it, so you could look up old newspapers, and they had,
Wow.
they had the Alaska Journal, Alaska Magazine bound. They had bound the magazines into yearly copy. They're still around. I mean, obviously the Alaska section isn't there, but it's at the Lusac Library.
Okay.
But that's where I lived for a while, and I was using their subscription to Ancestry
Okay.
to look at her background, because again, it's that same question: how did she get here? Who are her people? Where did she come from?
Yes.
So that was my initial question. I wanted to figure that out.
Yeah. And you had already done some of your own ancestry as well, so you kind of knew
Yeah,
the
I knew how to
process.
get around it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you also mentioned that in the
how to
book.
read census records and what they really mean, what these symbols mean, or the numbers and all of that. So it was very familiar to me.
Okay. Okay, that's awesome. And you mentioned that you also went down to Juneau to do some research as well.
Yeah, I went down a couple of times. I was working ahead of time through email with some of the archivists there, and they were tremendously helpful, because that's where the records were for. Well, I wanted to figure out her dad, because he was kind of a rascal, and so anytime he was in trouble, the court records and stuff were there, whatever was left, because Fairbanks had almost. I mean, they don't have the early Fairbanks information. They don't have. There aren't files on in Fairbanks.
Okay.
Everything they'd say that was been moved. If there is anything, it'll be in Juneau.
Okay.
So that's why I went there, and I did find stuff, and it's thrilling. That's the amazing thing about research, when you have a discovery that you're sitting there all alone and you have your own little party of one going, whoa, yes, yes.
Yeah, when you finally got,
when
a
you have a
nugget.
breakthrough or something.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I get it.
Okay. And you also spoke with some people that knew the family.
Well, in Fairbanks, I did. I mean, there are plenty of pioneers still around, even now, who remember Irene. But her family had, one of the things that she said when I did interview her, and it was in 1988 that I interviewed her in person and went to Fairbanks and spent time there with her. One of the things she said, and she was saying, I think there were 7 of us. That quote stayed with me. She was one of 7 children born to her parents. Agnes Eckert was her mother, and her father was J.P., James Paul Sherman. And they met and married in Fairbanks. And they had a very tumultuous marriage, very difficult. The mom was an addict. I think alcohol was her choice, and so she wasn't a very good mom for that reason. She also suffered from some undiagnosed mental illness problems, so it was a bad cocktail for kids in the household. And Dad wasn't around. He was gone mining most of the time, and he really didn't want to get married to begin with. He just didn't.
Yeah.
And he expressed that, but there were forces at that time that kind of suggested perhaps they'd been intimate, and so her parents and grandparents, or her parents, Irene's grandparents, would have said, we're going to have a wedding in the parlor. They ran the hotel in town. It was one of many hotels, but their hotel, her grandparents ran. So that's when I talk about the depth of her presence in Fairbanks. Her dad came in 1903 and up from Valdez. So he went to Valdez in about 1900.
Wow.
And she said he cut his teeth in Valdez on mining and stuff. And then he came up the Fairbanks Valdez Trail to Fairbanks and, staked his place there. But while he lived there on and off, he worked in the Totatlanica region.
Okay.
And that is the Bonneville district. So it's south of the Tanana River and north of the foothills of the Alaska Range. So it's a big bowl
Okay.
full of treasure. So,
That is awesome. Yeah, the way that you wrote the book, it makes it feel like you could do a tour of,
mm,
all these places that you mention in the book. It's cool. Like you would say, "Oh, this building is no longer there, but this is there instead."
mhm.
And I just think you could do a whole tour
You could, a
of
walking tour of Irene's places. I gave a talk one time at the Mining Museum, which is on Cushman,
Mm,
and from there I was giving a talk, and it was a full house, and they have windows on the Cushman side, and I said, "Right there is where this right straight in front of us, that was Gordon's Dry Goods. Behind it, they had some storehouse, huts or sheds, and then the Sherman cabin. Right across from the transit center, right there." And they were all looking back there and said they just said the same thing. Of course, it's so real when you're walking the same dirt.
mhm.
That's where they were. And where the hotel was for her grandparents is where the Children's Museum has been for many, many years on Cushman and 3rd. It was the 3rd Avenue Hotel.
Wow.
So,
That is so amazing. Um, so I'd like to go on to the moment that JP took Agnes and Irene, as well as her infant sister,
uh-huh,
into the mining camp area,
uh-huh,
and what happened there.
okay,
Because I know that there's been some situations where Agnes did not make the best of choices
yeah,
in those situations. It sounds like JP went out to work in the
uh-huh.
mining along the river, the creek, and Agnes was missing him
Well,
or
I'm
wanting
not
him.
sure if you could say she was missing him, but they spent time in town after they got married. Um, and they were supposed to, they said that he was going to take his dog team and the bride's outfit, meaning all of her stuff for beginning life as a married couple,
Uh-huh.
to their cabin, his cabin in the Totatlanika, after marriage. But it was super cold. They got married in the middle of winter, and she had a wonderful social life in town and went to the Eagle Hall dances and kicked up her heels and stuff. And so, um, and they stayed in town for a little bit after they married instead of leaving. Um, but when they then Irene was born in town. And again, they were at the cabin or back, they were back and forth. And the cool thing about the news miner at that time, all newspapers, they kept track on who's staying at the hotel, who's in town. So I was able to access the archives and say, oh, she did come in before the birth of this baby to have it in town. And so those kinds of things, I love that. Newspapers are valuable. Um, but Agnes, did not want to live in remote Alaska. It was incredibly difficult, made more difficult because she was caring for infants and a toddler, an infant and a toddler. And she balked against that. Well, she had little baby Jeanette. So Irene was 2, Jeanette was 2 months old. She had her at St. Mark's Mission in Inanna, which is closer, of course, than Fairbanks to the Totatlanika. And they went out to the Totat, as they call it, and he was planning to go into Nenana and onward to Fairbanks with his dog team, with stuff to sell and be able to get some money and buy and replenish the outfit, his outfit. That was his plan. So in his letter that he wrote later explaining what happened in his absence, he said, I chopped lots of wood. I had lots of water prepared. I had provisions in the cabin. They were going to be set till I got back.
Mm.
But, and I wonder, 2 months after pregnancy, if she had a little postpartum depression on top of whatever she's dealing with her own mental health.
Yeah, I could see that.
And when he left, she seemed frantically, she needed to follow him, is what was written at that time. She felt the need to follow him. And so, and the dogs were gone. They had a second sled. She put, a hide down, wrapped up the children in furs, and put Irene and baby Jeanette in the basket, and she pulled it herself. She didn't put in any matches or hatchet or food or water, anything. And, this was in February in the interior. So she walked into the teeth of a bad storm and got lost. And it was almost 24 hours before she somehow made it back to this as a relay cabin. She staggered back into the yard of the relay cabin, and the baby was frozen. The baby was frozen, and Irene was nearly dead. And she herself was in terrible shape. So somehow, I can't even use my imagination to figure out how she was able to get in the cabin and start a fire and save at least those last 2 lives.
Yeah, and it's just a miracle she was even able to make it back to the cabin
Right,
too.
right.
I imagine there could have been storms along with freezing temperatures.
Right. Well, imagine his surprise when he comes back home and he finds this scenario
Oh,
of they kept the baby wrapped up in the cabin to keep it from being, the animals getting to her body. And I'm sure that Irene and Agnes were just barely alive still. And he gets home, and then he's compelled to write a letter to the marshal in Fairbanks to explain what had happened.
and what came of that? Was there any kind of news article about that?
Yeah, the news, what was in the paper was based on his letter. I wanted to see the letter, but that's among those papers of early Fairbanks that are gone. Yeah.
Wow.
I thought, well, it's a legal document. It should be around. No. It's the last frontier.
Yeah, and probably before Office of Children's Services.
Yeah, they had what was called the Board of Children's Guardians.
Okay.
And that's ultimately the territorial enforcement that took Irene out and Jeanette. Well, Jeanette was dead, but Irene and another sister out of harm's way, out of her parents' care. So she became a ward of the territory because of the Board of Children's Guardians.
Ah, okay. And that was following the second incident when Agnes went to find JP.
Actually, it was, I thought it would have happened then when I was studying all this, but it really didn't happen until like 4 years later, 5 years later. In 1918 is when they finally decided that they weren't fit, and they surrendered.
Okay.
And that's in the book too. I have a copy, or I photographed their letter saying, we now see that we're not fit to do this, and we would like for you to take over care of these 2 children.
Okay.
One of them was already in the care of a Fairbanks family, the Burnett family. And that's a story that's kind of, again, all around Irene. All these years, and people had an accumulation of rumor and myth and reality, all kind of intertwined, and trying to tease that out to find. And also, even when a pioneer makes an oral history recording, they're doing it 70 years after the fact, and you wonder, are they remembering correctly?
Sure.
Or have they told the story so often this is the new story? And I found that to be true on one case when I was trying to figure out what happened with Irene's mom, the whole situation with her mental health and what she liked to do and go out dancing and bring baby Irene with her to the Eagle Hall dances and shove her in a carnation box in the corner of the of the ladies' room so she could go dance. And then the attendants in the ladies' room said, "You can't come anymore if you bring your baby." And it's just I'm try to cast back to, we know Fairbanks, cast back to a time when for one, dances with people with long dresses and dress suits, tuxedo style, and a 4-piece orchestra was the community dance. It's just wild.
Wow. Yeah, it was as I was reading the book, it's just interesting to just imagine like you could see yourself there with the way that you worded everything.
Mm.
Yeah. And so the situation with Irene and her infant brother,
Uh-huh.
and it was a neighbor girl as well.
Correct.
Agnes left them to go find JP
No,
mining.
actually, no, this was the fire. This was the
Yeah,
big
the fire.
fire. JP was at Fish Creek. He was north of Fairbanks at Fish Creek, but he was doing some mining up there. And, but she had decided it was late November, a couple of days before Thanksgiving, and it was really cold. And her little baby boy, James was his name, and he was in a buggy in this cramped little cabin. And as I put it in the book, it was kind of like his playpen and his bedroom, it
Mm-hmm.
was all in one. And Irene, being the daughter of an alcoholic, you're in charge. Here she is. She is 5 years old, not even 6. She was in charge of this little 9-month-old baby. And Mom went out drinking. She went to spend the day with some friends from the end of the line. The line in Fairbanks was the 4th Avenue line for the little prostitution houses. And there was a fence, like a courtesy fence for the gentleman who went to visit. But she had a friend down there. She broke a lot of societal laws and didn't care. She was a wild child. And so one of the things was her friend was a woman named Chloe, I think it was, and she washed the silks for the prostitutes. That was her job. And so her cabin was at the far end of the line. And she was breaking the rules too she had a gentleman friend who was a black, and
Okay.
and he was a guy who went around in his vehicle. Let's see, he had horse-drawn. I'm trying to remember what he did, but he had some kind of labor where it required him to drop off or pick up stuff. And he invited her to come with him on his ride-arounds, and she did that. And then people were like, this isn't right, just as when the city goes, no, 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 this is a proper place. And so she had been scolded, and he had been spoken to. But that day, Chloe and Agnes and this gentleman all meant for just, a day of shooting the breeze and drinking at Chloe's cabin. So when she left that morning, she pulled the door shut. Little neighbor girl was visiting and playing with the Sherman children, so called playing. So Irene's like, she called her the damn Porter brat. Her name was Mary Porter. And Irene, staunch to the end, claimed everything would have been okay if it hadn't been for the damn Porter brat who goes around throwing lit matches all over the place. So she was still so bitter when she was 77 telling me about it.
Wow.
But yeah, the fire went out in their stove. And the little girls were bundled up and little baby was covered up, but it got super cold and they were determined to start the fire on their own. And the idea is that she must have put a liquid on the burning embers and they just went whoomp. And the interesting thing too is Irene would be considered an unreliable source of her own life story.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, reality. But she was staunch, like I said, and this is all Mary Porter's fault. I didn't want her there. I didn't want to take care of her. She was giving me the big rant about I shouldn't have had her in the house. I could have taken care of my brother alone.
Hmm.
and this was her fault. But then, after all the interviewing and researching I did in Fairbanks, I went back to Anchorage, and I went to the archives in Anchorage, went to the microfilm at the Lusac Library, and I'm zoom looking at the accounts of the day of and the day after. And the account there said, and I'm all by myself in this little room, and it said, Irene came out of the house screaming, "I have set the house afire. I have set the house afire."
Ah.
And I just put my hand to my chest and rolled back and went, "What?"
Hmm. Wow. That is just, I mean, life changing
Yeah.
for her. Um,
Yeah.
it had to have been so young. And I mean, what was medical care like in Fairbanks at that time? Did they have?
They had doctors. They had a couple of doctors with offices um, that were probably better equipped in many ways than the hospital was because, everything was in reach and they knew how to use it.
Mhm.
But a burn, when you have skin melted away and you start losing fluid through their wounds, the first thing that they did, the triage took place at the Eagle Hall across the street,
Okay.
right across from the Sherman cabin. So they carried the baby over. They brought Mary and Irene in, and so the two doctors were working on these patients. Then baby James was sent to the hospital because he was in the worst shape. And they really didn't expect him to even make it to the hospital. He was so injured. And Irene looked like she was in better shape than Mary. Mary had injuries to her lungs, and so she didn't look as burned as Irene did, and she died.
Smoke
Yeah,
inhalation.
yeah.
Mm.
And then Irene, so by then they did get him to the hospital, and Irene lingered and lingered and lingered. And there were like 2 editions a day, and people wanted to know what's happening, what's going on, how is she doing, so there's constant updates through that period. What surprised me when you talk about medicine of that time is that her father, JP, someone had sent for him as soon as the fire was discovered, and they went to find Agnes, and they told her what had happened, and she just was destroyed and was beside herself, as they say. Um, they had to put her in a straitjacket. She
Mm.
was out of her mind with grief and knowing her part in it, and they took her to the same hospital, to St. Joseph's Hospital.
Okay.
Um, and then somebody sent for JP. They said he's up on Fish Creek, so a musher went with his dogs to go and fetch him. And he came back into town quickly, as quick as he could, stabled his dogs. They had stables for horses and dogs
Oh.
in town. Then he went immediately to Irene's bedside
Mm.
and got the story. And the newspaper said that she was able to whisper and speak to him and told him exactly what had happened. He ended up donating skin grafts for her, and they took, I think it's 200 little postage stamp size skin grafts from his body for her chest and arms.
Wow.
So it's places that we never saw because she was always in so many layers, but it would have been, pretty bubbled up and scarred that way.
Sure. Sure. And I also think about Agnes's mom,
Uh-huh.
Minnie, how she was doing,
Yeah,
because she was high class in
she
Fairbanks.
was. Yeah, she and her husband, John Patton. Minnie, I'm a grandmother myself. So when I think about her distress at seeing her grandchildren, one, as babies going out into the bush, with iffy circumstances, that would have been horrifying. But they did mind their own business. Um, it doesn't, there's no written word about how much anguish she suffered, but she did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
John
I
Patton, her
imagine
husband,
so.
was Agnes's stepfather. But but he was a really well-known local businessman, and he was a miner in the Tolovana region, and he built this fabulous hotel in 1904. It was 2 stories, and then 1905 he made it 3 stories high, and he had steam heat from furnaces down below that came up. He had an elegant restaurant, and they had a bar, the Globe Bar, in the lobby, and other kinds of amenities. It was lavishly furnished, and it was a central place for a lot of public gatherings. They belonged to a Presbyterian church. That's how they met. And it's the little church that's now in Alaska land, where a lot of people have gotten married. This little white, perfect drawing of a church is an actual church in Alaska land. They moved it there from 7th Avenue and Cushman to Alaska land in 67 or 66, probably.
Okay.
So that was their home church. And so they would have the Ladies' Society come over, and, they had meetings there, or the youth would come, and they would declare her the perfect hostess for their youth meetings. And lots of happy times.
Yes, I am very sure. So ultimately, Irene eventually went out of state for more medical care.
Right. When the territory declared her a ward, there was a court decision in Nenana. The juvenile court was in Nenana in 1918. And so 2 things happened. One, her birth sister, Frances, who had been adopted at birth, pretty much, not adopted, but fostered at birth. Agnes never accepted her. When she was born, she told her midwife, "It's not mine. I don't want it. You keep it." And as it happens, the midwife was Blanche Burnett. And she did. She consulted her family and her husband. Instead, they decided to raise that child, Frances. So she was a Sherman, but she was raised Frances Burnett.
Okay. And so how long did Irene spend out of state?
10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pretty much all of her adolescent years.
Yeah. And they were not all good times, I'll tell you that. It was, she had, oh gosh. So for one, back then, she would be traveling with a matron of some type. And this matron didn't want to be seen with her because of her burn scars. So she had to wear a veil over her head if she was out of the room.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did the matron ever take her back to Fairbanks for a visit?
A different person, not for a visit, but a different person at the end of when she became of age and she was able to go back home. She went back home with a different matron who was paid. It was out of a fund, they paid these people to accompany children if they had to leave.
Okay.
So she went on a steamship out of state, and she was in the Seattle area. Actually, the hospital that she went to would become Seattle Children's Hospital.
Oh.
And it was just starting then. It was just a little, like a 20-bed or maybe less facility. But it was like St. Jude. It was free to families, or what you could pay kind of thing.
Okay.
And it was a group of wealthy women who did fundraisers and made sure the money was there for the children.
That's awesome.
She was released at age 18. And the thing is, because she was in the papers through the years, even though she's in Seattle, they'd give an update on our little burn victim, that kind of stuff. She was known.
So she was still a big part of the
community. And the governor even knew her name. Over the years, several governors knew her name by first name,
Mm-hmm.
And from, even as recently as Jay Hammond, she was part of cutting the ribbon for opening the Stees Highway Bypass Bridge in 1977. And,
wow.
She was considered project manageress, is what they named her. So they did the ribbon cutting together and got their photos taken. And he authorized a sign there, and it said Irene's Way was the name of the path or the bridge. And so there's a chapter in the book about that sign, that very sign too, that somebody found it in the
Oh.
river years
Oh,
later while
really?
fishing for metal.
Oh,
And he calls me and goes, "Did you know anything about this sign?" I don't know. I think I might. So I looked into that and included that little story in there too.
okay. And so did Irene permanently move to Fairbanks when she turned 18?
She came back to, their home has been Fairbanks. Nenana was a home off again, on again, and Healy,
Okay.
because that was a community that didn't exist at the time, but it was closest to the mining that was going on for her dad. And they called it Healy Forks originally because the two rivers meet there. No, of course, there's no Parks Highway until the early 70s. So it was all railroad. It's just railroad access. Or, sleds and dogs and horses and stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, no, she, so that's where they went to party too when they had railroad. It was the railroad building of the railroad that she tied herself to. She felt like those were her pals, the railroad guys and gals. And so she came home to the Sherman Homestead, which was at Healy Forks, and where now the Golden Valley Electric Association has its power plant. It sits on the old Sherman Homestead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, you can't see it from the road too easily, but she had quite a view from her little cabin.
Sure.
She shared it with her dad. She was involved with hunting and trapping and fishing with her dad when she got out. Came back home.
So she reconnected with her dad.
She did. Love-hate situation. And he lived till he was 90.
Yes, and he at some point moved to southeast.
Well, he went into the pioneer home. There was only one pioneer home at the time in Sitka.
Okay.
And so when he was, when he was aged, that's where the old miners and pioneers and so he was in Sitka when he passed. And then they brought his body back and he was buried in the pioneer section of the cemetery.
Okay.
Birch Hill Cemetery.
Gotcha. Okay. And so Irene got involved in mining herself. Did she have
she was very able. Guys talked about her as like, yeah, she can do anything, as if she were a man. She can do anything. Very strong. And people talked about that when she was living alone in Fairbanks in her place. I've heard accounts of her picking up a man, or picking up heavy things, like supremely muscular under all the layers and layers that she you couldn't tell underneath there. And she was kind of petite, really, her frame, but she was, she plumped up and then she'd shrink and plump up and shrink. And but she was very muscular.
Yeah, there was a portion in the book where you mentioned that she was as independent of a woman as you've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can tell, you can see in the way that she built her house, which when did this happen? And I recall that she was given some land by someone that was well known in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she said, I always have some angel or around to look after me, and she was right. The first one was Les Nerlin, and he was one of the signers of the Alaska Constitution with his father, Andrew Nerlin. They were pioneers. He wasn't here as, they were satellites back and forth, but Fairbanks was home. He became mayor. He was a regent with the university, Alaskan of the Year, all this. He was very well respected, and he was genuinely a philanthropist because he literally gave without the other hand knowing. It was that kind of a thing. He didn't want any fanfare. He didn't want to be noticed. He just did things to help people. And in Irene's case, she was squatting on his land in the 40s already. And he allowed it, And so she lived among the trees. She told me she lived in a wall tent for 5 years, starting in about 48, and
Mm.
with a stove inside, but a wall tent in Fairbanks.
Wow.
So, and those are the years where her, the war years were really, she was kind of a hellion running around with the lad base guys and drinking a lot and, you know, having her brand of a good time. And that's when she gained the nickname Pack Sack Annie, because she was carrying lots of stuff on her backpack
And this was to take
in the
back to her
40s.
home.
Yeah, if she found stuff, she was not as full blown a collector then as she became. But and chronic hoarding they've associated with excessive trauma
Mm.
that that person may explain as they just need that object or that item, or it can't be moved. And
That's a good point.
yeah, so in her case, she she was living that way. In the 60s, he let her live across the way a little bit in what would become her well-known Front Street location in Fairbanks. In 67, the Great Flood came along, and the Chena River overflowed its banks extensively and washed away people on both sides of the river. And she was on the Garden Island side. And so anything that she had, and she didn't have really much of value, just it was valuable to her, as we all have.
Mm-hmm.
But it was taken away. And so Les Nerlin made the decision to build her a little white frame house on that land. And then he set into motion a couple of things. One, he guaranteed that she could live there until the end of her life. He did it through the courts, so it was legal. She had that to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing he did later, not long after, is that he said she would, that the house was hers, but the land would go to the borough at the time of her death. So, as the collector that she was,
Yeah, I was going to say, was she accepting of this house?
you could see the gable from a distance at some point, but other than that, it was surrounded by broken appliances that were chained together and pallets and cardboard and other kinds of things. But in the middle of it somewhere was that little house still. And I read about how she liked her privacy, as she was very, she didn't like to be scrutinized, as she put it. So she had different ways to enter that were known to her. Some were dead ends and some were not.
Wow. Imagine that, a
yeah.
maze of a house.
And I gave her a ride one day after an interview time, and I pulled up and watched her go in. I took a picture of that moment too, because I was like, oh my gosh. She was 77 at that time. I was just thinking, one fall, one broken hip, and that is it. And I watched her go up over these like wooden blocks that were balanced on papers, bundles of newspapers, and they were shifty. And she would up, and then she had to duck because there was like a clothesline thing, and she got her head underneath that and went down the other side. And I was like, oh, I don't know how she does it.
I love how vivid you remember this all.
Yeah. No. If you met her, you wouldn't forget her either.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I met somebody on Sunday at a birthday party, and he had spent some time in Fairbanks, lived in Fairbanks for, I believe he said about 5 years. And I was like, so you remember the Golden Days Parade?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Irene on the tricycle?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah. And it's the people that live in Fairbanks that make it so unique, he said. And it's just such a special place. And I honestly have only been to Fairbanks in the winter, fall, like late fall, and, partly in the spring, and I've never been in the summer. And I understand that there's some exciting things going on at this year's Golden Days Parade.
Yes. Oh, I'm excited for sure. For one, I sit on a committee, I co-chair a committee called the Irene Sherman Project, and we have been working on fundraising to put a larger-than-life bronze statue of Irene in a prominent place downtown.
Oh, that's so exciting! And this is the sculpture of
That's
it.
an that's an 8-inch maquette there. The sculptor is Gary Lee Price, who did the sculpture for the Dave Winfield statue and the Walter Harper statue that's in front of the Doyon building up there. They're sensational sculptures. And he sent me a video of his finished clay that was going to next go to the wax mold stage, and then it would go to the foundry. So it's almost to the foundry now.
Wow.
But he sent me a video, walked around it, and he said, I have never been so enthused about any of my sculpting projects. This is the best because of her story. So it's very heartwarming. He got a copy of the book and feels like he knows her too. But this year, it's so exciting. We're still doing fundraising because we haven't got the bill paid yet. And we need that. But we've decided to put a float in for Irene again. Last time she rode, I'm not sure, but I think it was in 88 when she rode on the back of a car instead of bicycling. She rode like a beauty queen on the seat, of a really fine sports car. And
that's still so fun.
It is. And she was, dressed with a parka over all these other clothes and then had a spangly cape around that and a feather boa and a big old Easter hat. It was like, it's this one, actually.
Aww.
That hat. And she, so this year we said, Irene rides again. We've got a plan from, first of all, Ralph Glasgow at the Howling Dog Saloon, which everybody wishes was still open, but it's not open anymore. He had in his collection, he dropped off Irene's original trike.
Oh, wow.
To Bob Ely, who operates the Fairbanks Community Museum in the old Empress Theater on 2nd Avenue. And so it will be permanently part of the display there. But it was pretty rough looking, as you can imagine. So it was missing 2 back tires and a fender, and it was pretty coated with rust. And the brake lines were all loose and all cracked and stuff. Naturally, it's very old.
Sure.
So anyway, I called around, and Goldstream Sports, one of the bicycle shops, has agreed. They have done it already. They've fixed it up, not shined it up, but they replaced the brake lines, and they gave us 3 tires. They put them on, and she's going to be on a little trailer following behind a tow vehicle, and I'm so excited by this. That's for Saturday morning. It's a parade at 10 o'clock. The night before, I'm doing a book signing at a local brew house, which is ideal because Irene always had, and you can see in this photo and on the cover too, she always had her Olympia beer mug tied to her waist with a rope. And she could get free beer whenever she wanted from any of the bars in town. And that was but it was Olympia was her brand. But this brew house, Humble Roots Brewery in Fairbanks, has developed a blonde ale that's called Irene. They named it Irene because they're really interested in local,
Sure.
So we're going to have
a great idea.
I'm doing a book signing there the night before the parade on the July 24th.
Okay.
The patrons are going to come help decorate. We're going to have the trailer there with a trike on it and the tow vehicle, and they're going to decorate and make it beautiful for the parade the next morning.
Oh my goodness, that is going to be amazing.
And we have an Irene person to play Irene, not me. I was thinking, oh my gosh, please let somebody step up because I don't want to be the one. Because if it's an 80-degree day in Fairbanks, yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
Very excited by that. Volunteer is going to be doing that and probably standing. I'm not sure the trike will bear any weight, but she'll stand next to it, hold on to the handlebars and stuff. And then members of my family will be walking along handing out flyers about how to donate to the statue fund. So the website is ireneshermanproject.com. And if a person wants to give, they can go there and give immediately through PayPal or Square or whatever they got hooked up there, credit card, anything.
Okay. Great. That is very good to know.
Yeah.
And so Irene is very much alive in Fairbanks still.
There's a generation or two that knows nothing about her. But at the low end of the boomers, they still remember her very well, and sometimes with great trepidation. My own children, we lived in Fairbanks when they were going to Nordale School, and they had to walk by Irene's house on the way to school. And they told me about how they would push each other toward, her land, going, "You touch the door. No, you touch the door." And those are just the tip of the iceberg on the number of stories that we've seen on Facebook posts about Irene and memories that people have of her.
Does the project have a Facebook as well?
I have the Queen of Fairbanks is a Facebook page.
So she left quite a legacy.
She did, and the thing, this is the essence of it. She was so different that any other place they would have packed her up and sent her to an institution. But Fairbanks loved on her and looked after her and made sure she didn't starve. People brought groceries quietly and left them at her doorstep. Used Belly Coal would bring free a delivery of coal for her there. Every bar and restaurant, if she left, she had a doggy bag of food. And she was just, and Wally Burnett, who was, this is odd, but he was the grandson of Blanche Burnett, who was the one who delivered little baby Frances, she adopted Frances into the Burnett family.
So they were in-laws.
They were in-laws, sort of, and that's what Irene said. "That makes us in-laws, don't it, Burnett?" And he goes, "That's right, honey." But they own the Polaris Hotel, which was recently torn down.
Okay.
He and his wife Ruth, and the bottom level was the Black Angus restaurant, and that's where we met for these interviews. So it grieves me to see that empty space, but the current mayor, Mindy O'Neill, has great ideas for things to do downtown to make it a really welcoming place and a place of commerce for small businesses and stuff. So they're now planning what they're going to do in that place.
Awesome.
That block.
Well, that's exciting to see what's going to come of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of good, things change. And those of us who like history, kind of like, I wish, but you got to embrace what's coming too. So lots of good things ahead.
So another thing that I wanted to mention was Irene had mentioned these siblings that she had, and she technically only met 2. Is that correct? It would have been when she was young, a child, but the others she did not know.
Well, right. She knew little baby Jeanette, but she was only 2, so she probably didn't have any memory of baby Jeanette.
Sure.
Who died at 2 months old. She was she was aware that Frances existed, but I don't know that they, as children, they were in different circles, completely different social circles.
Okay.
And I understand that Agnes had changed her mind at some point and was like sending barbed messages to the woman who was raising Frances, to Blanche Burnett, I'm sorry. And then that other child, little baby James. So I could count 4. I could count those 4 when I was trying to figure out what happened to the 7. But the other 3 are, if it was 7, or maybe she was wrong. And that's always a premise, it's like, well, maybe she was not correct about her own life. You never know. So part of doing this, also my goal became to find out what happened to these other kids, what happened to them all. And I found what happened to the 3 that were born after the state took away. So 2 are dead, and the state took away 2, and that leaves Irene. Or Irene was one of the 2.
Yes.
When the state took them, or the territory took them away, they started having more babies. So there were 3 more born after that point. So 1918 is when the territory took the two children, Frances and Irene, as their own. They said, okay, the Burnett family wants to formally adopt Frances. So she's in a good place. So in the court order, it's like, she's fine where she is. We're going to let them do their thing. Irene, we're going to look after her. And the first thing they did was send her to the more burn treatment in Seattle. So, but the family was at that time back in the Healy area, Denali Park area now, and had more babies. So that was the odd part. What started the whole book, in fact, because I had written about her in '88 and put all my notes away, and it was a great story, and it blew up a bunch of myths about her, and I, moved on to the next thing and the next and the next. Then I got a call in January 2019 from a stranger in Idaho. Not a call, it was an email, a late night email, and I didn't know. I was like, I don't know anybody in Idaho, and she said, my name is Michelle Moore, and I'm so glad I was able to find the PDF of your story on Irene from way back from '88. It was online for the News Miner, and I found it, and I could make out your name, and I hope this is right, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. She said, my late mother-in-law was Irene's birth sister.
Wow.
And, just that was like, oh, how bizarre and interesting. And as we went into COVID, then that became a focus for me to this was a brain activity that I couldn't put down. I kept thinking about questions and things to pursue and what happened to, and when did that happen? And what about her family and all that? Went to bed thinking about her, woke up thinking about her. So I didn't intend to write a book. Wasn't planning to. I thought maybe a parallel, an updated magazine pace for the ones that I had done in the original. But there are no magazines anymore. I mean, it breaks my heart, It breaks my heart. I'm the former editor of Alaskan magazine. I loved that job. And now it's gone down to almost, it's almost not it's a pamphlet size. It's just pathetic. It makes me sad.
Yeah.
So many stories are not told. And I did feature stories and magazine pieces all through the years. I miss the community loves those kinds of stories, but there's not really the same access as we used to have. So it's just different, and it's not something I'm familiar with.
Sure.
So I just felt like, well, I don't have that option, but I'm still interested. So I kept looking into it, and pretty soon it was like, I guess it's going to have to be a book. So I went to Idaho and visited that family.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That would be my next question. But yeah, that is so awesome.
And that daughter, that baby that was born, her name, she was adopted. So the last kids were adopted out. Mm-hmm. And her name was the combination. She was born Pauline Agnes Sherman. So dad was James Paul, and then mom was Agnes. So baby was Pauline Agnes. And then another boy came along, the last one who was born. So those two children were in the house. And I know there was a third one. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the third. I know there's a third one because there's this big gap when she's not pregnant.
Oh.
And, okay. She's not, there was a baby in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And, but that's not a historian's approach, obviously. But I figured it out finally with help from Denali Park author and photographer Tom Walker, who had written a book about the settlers of McKinley Park.
Okay.
And in it is a retelling of a story when the ranger is finding that J.P. Sherman is taking sheep out of season, and what his statement was. And his statement was, my wife, I have a wife and 3 kids in Nenana, and I'm hunting food for my family. So 3 kids, 3. That proves there was a third kid. So that was a really important point. And it was also about the time of when the flu was raging through Nenana. Mm. And I don't have death records for this child. I don't know what gender it was, but that was proof that there was a child in the home.
Okay.
So that's the only one. The other 2, I did find out what happened to them, and And it's so bizarre. I mean, there's so many cool twists and turns because these two ended up being adopted by, without their knowledge, their great aunts.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that
Yeah,
something?
one
How it
took
all
one and one took the other.
came back to the family.
And they lived in California. They were raised in California, and they did not know they were birth siblings. They only knew that they were cousins. They were told they were cousins.
Wow.
So,
It's an amazing story.
yeah.
I love it. And everybody, I recommend this book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so much. Like, yeah. So I want to also make mention that she has written other books, some children's books.
Yeah, and books for adults too. I have one that's called The Alaska Homesteader's Handbook. That is with a writing partner. We split up a list of 44 pioneers of all ages all over the state and asked each one a little bit about their profile so we could have a little how you got here kind of story. Plus, each was required to give us one tip for getting along in the wilderness. So that's been a very
That
steady,
has to be
popular
interesting.
book. Yeah, it is really cool. And we've lost, I mean, there's quite a few people in there we've lost since it came out. But that makes it, I think, all the more valuable in that sense. And Bud Helmrich, in fact, wrote the introduction, and he was an author in the 40s with Knopf Publishing about We Live in Alaska, you know, the last bush pilot in Alaska, that kind of thing. He's written so many cool things, a real authority on pilots, piloting. He had an in-holding in Gates of the Arctic, and amazing guy.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah, and then children's books has been my delight. There's the Homesteader's Handbook. I've written 11 children's books, I think 12, and just my first one, I started, as a journalist. I started as a journalist writing for a Fairbanks Daily News minor and features editor. And so writing from a journalism perspective got me my first book where I was invited, please, do you have any stories that you'd like to tell, any children's books in you? And I was like, well, I haven't suffered enough. Yes, I do. So that book was Children of the Midnight Sun. So that was a profile with photographer Roy Corral. We profiled one child from each of the native groups. We went to the villages and interviewed them and, learned about their lives and what makes that group unique from all the others. And
that is such a cool idea.
It was fun, really fun. That was a long time ago. We did the research in the mid-90s, and that came out in 1998 with Alaska Northwest Books. And then so I just kind of got into this habit. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun, and now I've kind of in this season, I'm not pressing as hard to elevate and go kind of thing, but I do enjoy. I speak at conferences or I do one-on-ones with people that want a word of encouragement or how do I get started and where to go. And I send children's book authors to, or wannabe authors, to the Society of Children's Book Authors and Illustrators, scbwi.org.
Okay.
And Alaska has a very active chapter and very helpful each other. They really do support each other and say, oh, so-and-so's looking for this kind of a submission. You should go there and that sort of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the Alaska Writers Guild also is a very important group here in the state. And we have a conference once a year in Anchorage that is supporting, so Alaska Writers Guild for adult fiction, nonfiction, whatever kind of writing you like to do, poetry. They had the Romance Writers of America Alaska chapter as a second group, and then SCBWI, the three organizations bring up authors editors and agents from publishing houses and major cities to teach us, and then we learn we learn from each other as well.
Wow, that's awesome that you guys are able to connect and all come together.
Yes, yeah,
with writing in common and help each other out.
We do, and for years we had a booth down at the Saturday Market when it was downtown originally before it moved to Diamond Center, where we sold each other's books. So we would have our square device and figure out what percentage of the total income belongs to this person, that person, and send them a PayPal. So it was really fun. We'd all, if you're coming, you got to sign your book. So it was great meeting tourists and all that. They'd be picking up books of how much does this book weigh? My bag is full.
And you're also currently working on a book.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to, I have presented PowerPoint, done talks about it a couple of times. And at the end of it, as I'm at work on this book, and I'm like, I'm really not. You're really tired. But I mean, I did all the work to do the organization, to do the presentation. It's about gnome sled dogs in World War I that went to the eastern front of France to serve the French army in the deep snows of the French Alps, where horses and mules were foundering in the snow and couldn't get access to bring wounded in or out, bring in fresh troops and wounded out, and food and supplies and ammunition and all of that. They used sled dogs. So in Nome, the famous Scotty Allen, who was a persistent winner of the Alaska sweepstakes race in the early part of the 1900s, was the dogman of Alaska. He's the dogman of the United States. Even though he's Scottish, he was Scottish. And so there, he was so well respected for all of his advanced ways of how to care and train dogs. He was, keep them on clean beds of hay and keep them under a roof and treat them well and don't, attack them if they're naughty and that kind of thing. He really knew how to use positive reinforcement for training. So his famous dog was Baldy.
Baldy.
He was not bald at all in any way, but that was his name. And he and Baldy were a team, and they were together for life. I mean, Baldy went with him when he retired to California and spent his last days there. But 26 of Baldy's descendants went to war.
Wow. I've never heard of this. Like,
most Alaskans haven't.
How did you come to know this?
I can't remember. I was working on this book when I got that late night email in 2019. And I put those files aside and didn't get back to them until Irene was kind of out there now. But I have a woman who wants to represent me as my agent, and she says, just, we talked about what she needs, because I said, I know what's going to happen. I just haven't written this part yet. So she's encouraged me to give me what I have and give her what I have, and then she will take it from there. And she says, you can sell a book that's not finished. I've never had an agent before.
Oh,
ever.
So that's a new experience.
So yeah, and I know what they do and how useful they are, especially if you want to reach a wider audience. But regional publishing is still very much alive, and you don't need an agent to bring a regional subject to a regional publisher. So
okay. Now, I know that you have a website. Do you mind sharing what that is?
Oh yeah, it's triciabrownbooks.com. Yeah, I was at Captain Cook Hotel a couple weeks ago for a one-day thing that they decided, let's try out a summer market for the tourists that come into the hotel.
Okay.
And so I was the only book person, but there was lots of other really cool makers in the ballroom. And I was very surprised that these people that came in, that they really were interested in Irene's story. I had all these really cool, I would think, you're traveling, you're a grandparent, you have grandchildren at home, you've been to Alaska. Surely you want one of these Alaska books, children's books. But they really focused on the Irene story, and I was really pleased by that. So that shows me it definitely is people's story.
Yes.
And
very
just like
so.
Babies are attracted to babies, people are attracted to people stories. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they were very interested, and I was happy to hear that. I told her story many times that day.
That is so awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tricia, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to hear more about your finished product of your new book.
That is that's a kick in the pants, actually. There's the PBS equivalent in Paris that does broadcast to not just France, but also that side of Europe, is coming to Alaska in a couple of weeks to interview not just me, but lots of people, because it's kind of a travel, interesting things about Alaska thing that they're doing, but they're particularly interested because of the French connection
Sure.
between the sled dogs and France. And so we're going to be talking about it for their audience
That is
very soon. Yeah.
That's so exciting. Sounds like a busy time.
It is, but I'm also going to make time to go to Chena Hot Springs and get a soak.
Oh, there you go. You got to do that. I can't miss out on that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Most welcome. Thank you.
Look for The Queen of Fairbanks or Order by Title at any of these Alaskan outlets. It is not available on Amazon. However, many of these Alaskan stores have websites for mail orders. In Fairbanks, the Great Alaskan Bull Company, Alaska Geographic Shop inside the Morris Thompson Cultural and Visitor Center, the Fairbanks Community and Dog Mushing Museum, Solstice Books, Humble Roots, and Barnes & Noble. In Anchorage, Tidal Wave Books and Barnes & Noble. In Ketchikan, Parnassus Books distribution by Todd Communications.